Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A gute Woche and a gmar chesima teva. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights, LLC, and it's in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg Olav Hashalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz Olav Hashalom, and Rabbi Yael HaKohen Khan Olav Hashalom. It's also in schus and merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz Le'erech Yomim V'Shanim Tevis for many long, healthy years. So we've begun chapter 15, Perek Tezvav of Tanya, which continues the theme of the centerpiece, the central theme of Tanya, which is Sefer Shalbeni, the Beinani, which began being discussed in chapter 12. The Beinani is that paradox. On one hand, has a divine soul and an animal soul that are at war with each other. However, he also has self-mastery, that the animal soul, even though it's active, cannot control his thought, speech, and action. The divine soul controls that. Unlike the tzaddik, who doesn't have the battle any longer, because he's transformed his animal soul into being an ally and asset to the divine soul. And unlike the Rasha, who not only has the battle, but unfortunately at times gives into it, and the animal soul does have an effect on his thought, speech, and action. As we learned till here. With that, the Alter Rebbe now enters into understanding the Beinani more, and especially different levels of the Beinani, because the Beinani is that quintessential personality that each one of us is, inherently. Midas kol adam, v'acharer kol adam yumshech. It's our very personality, it's who you are. And therefore something that you can aspire to, which is self-control, self-mastery. You can't destroy your animal soul. You can work at it, you can control it, refrain, restrain, to some extent, even at times, attempt to be like a tzaddik, like he explained in chapter 14. But you're essentially a Beinani. So understanding more of the psyche and of the personality of the Beinani, the anatomy of the Beinani, dissecting it is what we continue to do now in chapter 15. And with understanding this paradox of the Beinani, these two sides, he goes now back and speaks about the Bezeh Yuvan in chapter 15, Mashakosu v'shaftem. V're'isam bein tzadik l'rosha bein eved alikim l'asher lo yavodeh. The pasuk in Malachi. That says, you will again see the distinction between the tzaddik and the rasha, between the one who serves God and one who does not serve him, which seems to be a redundancy. Tzaddik and Rasha seems that Tzaddik serves God, the Rasha does not. But the Alter Rebbe, in his brilliant way, will now explain this posuk based on what we learned, that no, it's not redundant. We're talking about actually three different levels. Tzaddik, Rasha, then Avodeh, V'lo Avodeh is two levels in the Beinani, as we shall now discuss. And this is understood from what we learned till now, what a Beinani is. So what does the Alter Rebbe say? Shehefresh bein Eved Elikim leTzadik. It's not synonymous. There's a difference. And the difference, if you think about it, is so simple, you sometimes lose sight. Just read the words. It says, Eved Elikim hu, she'eved hu loshen heve. L'shen heve. Shu be'emtza aveda. Eved does not mean Eved. It doesn't mean a servant. It means one who serves. Shu be'emtza aveda. He's in the process of serving, which is exactly the description of the Beinani. Shehima hamalchama ima yetzer hara lizgabra lov legashi ma irktana. This is the battle. The battle, the ongoing battle with the yetzer hara, to overcome it and chase it away. Lizgabra lov legashi ma irktana, from the small city, which is the body, which is the person. Shelo yislabish be'evdei haguf. That the Yetzer Hara should not influence any of the body's limbs. meaning any control over the person himself. Shehu be'emes aveda v'omel gadol. This truly requires a tremendous struggle and effort, le'ilochem beitomid, to constantly fight with it. So the emphasis is that it's an active process. You're in an active war, and that's why it's lashon heva, ovid, not eved, not a state of being, but a state of action, is because it's such a truth, such a big war, and you have to constantly fight it. V'hainu habeinani. So when they say ovid, when he says Ovid Elikim, he's constantly fighting that battle. That refers to the Beini. That's not the Tzaddik. Avlat Tzaddik, because the Tzaddik is a very different state. Avlat Tzaddik nikre Eved Hashem. The Tzaddik is referred to by a noun, a description, Eved, not Ovid Hashem, Eved Hashem, a servant of God. That's from Sefer Dvarim, Lamed Dalet Hey, 34:5. And the Alter Rebbe explains, like we say, K'moy Shem Chochamei Melech. Like we say the title, like a scholar, a king, or a king. This is a state of being. It's not an active state. Shekvar Nasa Chochamei Melech. He's already become a scholar or a king. So the same thing, when you say that the tzaddik is Eved Hashem, Kach ze kfar Eved. Same thing. That when you say he's Eved Hashem, it means that this is where he is already. He's already become this state. V'gomar. L'gamri avedus amlchom imara. Remember the tzaddik, as we learned in chapter 10, he's already served and completely finished his labor of fighting with the evil in him. Ad ki vayigosheyu vayelachle, to the extent that he's driven it away and it's gone from him. This is from Tehillim, Lamed Daled Aleph, 34:1. Like we learned that it's not an active process. He's done the work and he's finished it. He's eliminated the Yetzer Hara. Ad, like he says, ki v'gashev v'yelachle. So in an active battle, you're engaging with others. You can control the city, but you are engaging, like the Beinani. But the tzaddik, there's no engagement. It's finished. And furthermore, v'libe chol b'kirbe. That just tells you that's a state of being. Because if he was still engaging, you can't say libe chol b'kirbe, that his heart is empty within him. What do you mean it's hard, that Yetzer Hara is still there? Once you say it's empty, it means it's finished. He's banished it from his consciousness, from his being. As explained in chapter 10. So therefore, that's why you call him Eved Hashem, like the Chacham or the Melech. So in a very simple but also very profound way, the pasuk, when you say Tzaddik, does not mean Eved Elikim. Tzaddik is Eved Havaya, Eved Hashem. And a Beini is a Eved Elikim because he's an active progress. It's an active a lifetime war, actually. Why does it say Elikim and Havaya? So the commentaries on Tanya explain. It also makes sense. Because Elikim, we know, is Gematria Teva, also refers to Helam, because the Beini is engaged with the concealment that the Nefesh Abamis creates. Whereas Havaya is like Shemesh Shemogan Hashem Elikim, so Shemesh, the sun, it's Gilui. So Tzaddik is involved with the Havaya part. But that's just a deal. The Alter Rebbe doesn't mention it explicitly. From later, what we learn later, you could derive it from what he said later. I'm just looking. Yeah, we'll discuss this later as well. He talks more about the details of this. Okay. So now, that distinguishes and understands that tzaddik and the Eved Elikim are not the same thing. One is tzaddik, one is Beinani. But we still have to understand, so what means lo yavodai? And lo yavodai we know is not the Rasha, because it's not redundant. So he's going to explain now, can continue to explain, after we understand that Eved Lakim is not like the Tzaddik, let's talk about Asher lo yavodai, how that's not like the Rasha. So the Alter Rebbe continues now. Ubebeineni yesh gam ken shtei madregas. The Beinani, within the Beinani, there are also two levels. And that's the verse. Eved Elikim, v'asher lo yavodei. One who serves God and one who's called one who does not serve him. So now the Alter Rebbe is going to add a new piece that we haven't learned till now. Because you could ask the question, what do you mean you don't serve him? We just said a Beinani is a whole lifetime he's fighting. So what do you mean he's not serving God? On the contrary, he's constantly serving. And yet, in the Beinani itself, there's these two levels. And that's what the verse is referring to. Of Eved Elikim Asher lo yavodai. So the next piece is going to elaborate and discuss this in detail. Okay. It's interesting, he says, Beinani yesh gam kein. So you could touch yesh gam kein, you could say that in what we just said, the Beinani, that itself also breaks down into two. Or you could interpret Yesh Gam Kein, because remember with the Tzaddik and the Rasha, in corresponding in the chapters, respective chapters 10 and 11, he said there's two levels in each one. So perhaps he's alluding to that Beinani also has two levels. But that can be interpreted in different ways, because we also realize Beinani has many more levels, as a Tzaddik does, as a Rasha does, as he explained in those chapters. But generally two. But before he continues, he says, and either way, the two levels of the Beinani, whether it's called someone who serves or someone who doesn't serve, avafal pikein ein a rasha. It's not the first part of the verse. Kiloi over miyom of shuma veda kala. Because when you're talking about a Beinani, he never committed even a minor transgression in his life, that we learned earlier. V'gam kayim kol ha-mitzvahs she'ef shalei l'kaimon. So both sur merah, he never did a sin, and also performed and fulfilled, observed every mitzvah that was possible for him to observe, as we learned. Nasei teif. The Talmud Torah keneged kulam, including the study of Torah, which is equal to them all, like we learned earlier. V'lei pasik pumim migirsa. He does not allow his mouth to stop studying. Because remember, a person who does not learn Torah all the time, there's a sin called bittul Torah, as he learned earlier, as we discussed earlier, which is something harsh, as he discussed in chapter 1. And also later when he talked about Rabbah. So even though we say lo yavodai, it's still not a Rasha. So then what means lo yavodai? He doesn't serve? So he's going to explain what that means. So what could you call lo yavodai? You just said it's a person who does not do any no transgression, does every mitzvah possible, le pasuk pum megirsa, does not allow his mouth to stop studying. So how is it possible to call this person a person who does not serve? Comes the Alter Rebbe and is going to explain. Ella, why is he called lo yavodai? Why is there a level in a Beinani lo yavodai? And there's a level, of course, of Eved Elikim. So here's how he explains it. Listen to this. It says like this. Ella, the reason he's called lo yavodai because she'ein eisa shum melchama im hayetzer. Even though in reality he has total mastery over his thought, speech, and action. Remember, the animal soul is active, but is not allowing it to control him. But he's not actively fighting his yetzer hara at all to overcome it. Al yedei ir Hashem ameir al nefesh alikisha b'moyach hashal ta'alav. like we learned earlier, how do you wage that milchama? By making use of the godly light which shines on his divine soul within his brain, within his mind. Remember, mind. Shmoyach Shaltav, that the mind, the reflective mind, controls the impulsive heart, which comes with the nefesh halikis that radiates, as he explained in chapter 12, Moyach Shalta 11, chapter 13, the divine energy that radiates, that gives him that power. Kiniska li'il, as described above, which was in chapter 13. The question is why? What is it, just automatic? We know there's an Aveda necessary. The Yetzer Hara, the Nefesh HaBamis is active. So the Alter Rebbe continues. Mepnei she'ein yitzrei oimed lenegdei klal. Levatle miterose v'avedose. Because in this case, this type of Beinani is a particular type. His Yetzer Hara doesn't challenge him at all to draw him away from his study or his worship. V'ein tzorech lilchem imay klal. And there's no need for him to fight it at all. Why? How is that possible? So he gives Kigoyin, for example, Shahu Masmid, Bilimudei, Betive Mitel Dose. For example, a person whose inherent nature is to study constantly. Person is nature. He's wired that way. Alidei Tagberis Hamorish Chere. Is he going further? Why is he that way? To just explain, it could be he's that way because it's natural. Some people like to learn, like to study. But he's going even further. Due to an abundance of Morish Chere literally means black bile, but it means a type of temperament that would say associate more with a depressed temperament. Morish Chere. Meshchere means dark, and Mora is more like mar from the word bile. But referring to somebody that has an element of a certain somberness. Depression is a stronger word, atzvus, but he doesn't use atzvus, but essentially it's a person who's more, not that outgoing, not that exuberant. So therefore, his very nature gravitates toward learning. So it's not a battle for him. It's not like he doesn't want to. He's a person who's out there doing all kinds of active stuff, and his Yetzer Hara doesn't let him learn. No, it's natural for him because of this reason. And we're talking about even from the Nefesh HaBamis, obviously. It's Nefesh HaBamis nature. So Nefesh HaBamis goes along with it because why not? It's stimulating, it works for it. But it's not coming from an Aveda because there's no battle going on. And he continues, that's one example. V'chein, ein loy melchama mitayvus noshim. Another as well, another person who does not have to wrestle with a desire for the opposite gender, women, tayvus noshim, that desire, mepnei shehu mitzunan betivei, because he's passionless by nature. He's cold-hearted, he's cold-blooded. So he doesn't have that type of passionate side. Some people, so therefore he's not as hot-blooded and so driven and passionate and fiery about that. Not because he works on it, because that's his nature. And the Alter Rebbe continues, because he wants to show it's not just two examples. And likewise with other worldly pleasures. He naturally lacks a feeling of enjoyment. There's some people who just love life. They love to indulge in life. It has to be harnessed, has to be directed. But there's some people by nature, that's not their nature. They're just not indulgent people in that sense. So therefore, in a person like that, he could also technically be a Beinani, because the Yetzer Hara is not affecting his thought, speech, and action to do something against Torah, and he's involved in learning all the time, because that's his nature, like you just described. So it's not a Melchama, but he's still a Beinoni. So we learned earlier that a Beinoni needs to contemplate and make his mind active and do whatever he can to control his animal soul. A person like this does not need it as much because his Yetzer Hara is weaker, because by nature he's not as conducive to these things that he described in general, the pleasures of this world of the animal soul. So he does not need to meditate and contemplate too much on the greatness of God. Lahilid mibinose ruach das, the faculty of cognition, to produce a sense of resonance, recognition, das, like you explained in chapter 3. V'yiras Hashem b'meichei, and at the same time also the reverence of God in his mind. To be careful not to transgress any of the prohibitions. So by him it's not as necessary, because his nature is working for him in this context. And he talks about that's the Yira side. And also Va'avas Hashem beliba l'dovka by b'kima mitzvahs. So he also does not need that type of contemplation to reach a level of love of God in his heart, to connect to God, l'dovka by b'kima mitzvahs, through observing the mitzvahs. So both again, Sur Maran, Asay Tev, he does not need that much Avodah. The Avodah. The Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, including the mitzvah of the study of Torah, which is equal to them all. He repeats that again, because that is a prominent example for all of this. He's learning all the time, like we learned before, but it's coming from his nature. It doesn't coming from a battle. It's not coming from a particular deliberate or strong effort. Kol kach doesn't mean there's no effort, but relatively speaking, as we'll learn with the other type of Beinoni, with far more effort. So as the all of this, what do we see here? That the effort is not so necessary. And that's all that's going to be hinted in Lo Yavodai. So then what does compel him to learn Torah and keep mitzvahs? We've understand his nature is one that he's not as, like he said, he gravitates toward learning because his nature is more somber. It's his personality. He's not as passionate. He doesn't indulge as much. But what we still don't have an answer. Why then is he driven to Torah and mitzvahs? So he continues and says, Elo, dai loy ba'ava musuteres, asher belev klolos Yisrael. For him, what he needs, not so much Avodah, but he does have something going for him. He has, no less than every other Jew, the dormant love, the Ava Mesoteres, the concealed love, which is the nature of every Jew. So in addition to his nature of his Nefesh Habamis being not so passionate, not so indulgent, more somber, and therefore more gravitating toward learning, he also has the Ava Mesoteres, which is in every Jew's heart. Shebelev close his soul, found the heart of all Israel. Shenikru Evei Shmei, who are called lovers of his name. Which is a natural description of a Jew. So we have now, to sum up, this is a person who is a Beinoni, but it doesn't take that much work because his Nefesh Habamis, his very personality is wired to gravitate and stay away from the indulgences of this world, to gravitate toward learning. He also has, it's enough, the Ava Mesoteres. So to say there's no work at all, he said that's why he loy kol kach, not that much, but he has something, but he has also this love that's inside, that's enough. And therefore, for all these reasons, therefore, this level of the Beinoni cannot be called in any way one who serves. Because in Torah, every word is bedik. You say someone who serves means really serves. To say he doesn't serve, you can't say. But in relative terms, it's called lo yavodai compared to Eved Elikim, as we're going to learn. Ki avazu ha'mesoteres eina pu'ulosei v'avodosei klal. Because that natural love, that inherent love, was not brought out by him, nor is in any way his achievement. Rather, it's an inheritance from Aviseinu, from our patriarchs, to the whole of Israel. As will be discussed later in chapter 18 and 44. So you can't attribute it to his Aveda. And the other parts of him are also not his Aveda. That's how he's wired. What we discussed earlier. So as a result of all of that, you call him lo yavodai. And the reason being is because relative to real Aveda, full Aveda, that is the full battle and the full work, as we're going to learn soon, is called lo yavodai. Now this is a tremendous concept when you think about it. Again, you see the Alter Rebbe's precision and also his standards. It's a tremendous standard. What he's looking for here, in other words, is dissecting and showing that a person could be a Beinoni, mamish. And we know how hard it is to be a Beinoni. And yet, we have to acknowledge that for this person it's easier. And therefore there's less the element of Aveda. And then he adds, V'chein af mi she'ena masmid bilumudei b'tivei. The same categorization of a Beinoni who does not serve God is also applicable to a person who doesn't have a natural disposition to study all the time, unlike the one we just described. She'im asmid bilimud b'tivei, rak shehir gilatzmei, lilmid b'asmod g'dei levanasa hergelei tavasheni. But he trained himself. We're talking now someone else is not wired that way, but he trained himself. He disciplined himself to study with extreme persistence, smodig dela, v'nasa hergelei tevasheni, and it became normal for him, a second nature. So he's speaking now another category. So here too, dailoi ba'ava musuteres zu. For him, it also is sufficient. The hidden or dormant love is enough to maintain this position. So it's also lo yavodai. And that we'll discuss in the next year. He could go beyond his regilus. So now we're talking about it, it's almost like you can call it a cultural Jew, mechanical even. It's a Beinoni, but it's not coming from Aveda because he's trained himself. So then the question is, what is Aveda? Aveda is going to be going beyond your nature, beyond your natural love for God, beyond your teva and regilus, your habit or your second nature, what has become your custom, your tradition. That's going to be called Aveda. We'll stop here. And we'll continue next week. Next week the class will be again Thursday night, 9:30 p.m. because of Sukkot, as well as the following week, Thursday, 9:30. Everyone have a Gemar Simeteva, a good Gebench to Yar, a meaningful Yom Kippur that reaches the highest levels, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida, the 5 tefillas, and all your brachas should be fulfilled. It should be a year of Teva, Nirva, Nigla, a year of Geula, Amitis, Vashlema. Gemar Simeteva.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.